Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers. Welcome to today's Halaqa. My name is Shuaib, and today I'm very proud to present to you the story of the Battle of Badr. Now, take yourselves back to the year 622. This is a very important year for Muslims. Can anybody tell me why? For those who don't know, this is the first year in the Islamic calendar. It starts with the Hijrah. Does anybody know why the Hijrah happened?
They were commanded by Allah to move from Mecca to Medina.
And why did Allah command them to do so?
Because they wouldn't feel safe. They weren't safe anymore in Mecca.
Exactly. Mecca was a terrible place for the Muslims at the time. The Meccans were ruled by the Quraysh tribe, who were the most powerful men in Arabia. They used to make lots of money off the slave trade and the Hajj pilgrimage, but not the Hajj that we know. Their Hajj was filled with idols, with debauchery, drinking, and a very horrible lifestyle that we don't want to be part of. So when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came around with his message of monotheism, of standing up for the weak, of protecting women and helping orphans, they didn't want that to happen. They didn't want him to seize power. So they persecuted him wherever he went. This was led by Abu Jahl. They used to throw rocks at him, make him bleed, dump garbage outside his home. So the Prophet ﷺ knew that the Muslims, their days in Mecca were numbered. So he sent them to Yathrib in waves. Eventually Abu Jahl thought enough is enough. So they tried to assassinate our beloved Nabi ﷺ. However, Allah had already commanded him to escape from his home with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and they'd got away to Yathrib. 2 years later, the Islamic state of Medina was in full swing. The Prophet ﷺ was giving sermons in the streets to the people of Medina and converting people left, right and center. Now, what happened to the possessions and the wealth of those who had left Mecca?
They lost everything.
Yes, so what happened to it?
They lost everything.
Exactly. They had nothing left, and the Meccans seized all of it. All they had was the clothes on their backs when they came to Medina. So, knowing this, the Prophet ﷺ knew he had to avenge his people in some way. He had to provide them with something. And in addition to that, he had to reward the Ansar, the helpers of Medina, for their help in welcoming the believers into Medina and giving them shelter. So, he caught wind of a trade caravan, a Meccan trade caravan led by Abu Sufyan, which was moving from Mecca to the Levant. He was going to conduct business in Damascus and Jerusalem. So the Prophet ﷺ decided to raid the caravan and take the loot for the Muslims. He sent out scouts to locate the caravan. However, Abu Sufyan had scouts of his own, and he managed to evade the Muslims by taking a different path and going along the Red Sea coast. On the way back, his caravan was laden with riches from the Levant, and the Muslims were doubly eager to go and seize the cargo. Abu Sufyan sent his fastest rider to warn the Meccans that the Muslims were coming to take the caravan. When he arrived, he tore his shirt, he pulled the ear off his camel, yelling with rage at the people of Mecca, "Your caravan is under attack, our riches, our gold is all going to go." So Abu Jahl decided to take up arms against the Muslims. He went with his fellow tribes members to attack Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ and his men who were out doing the raid, they were already out in the desert in Badr. So he decided to have a war council. He knew the Meccans were closing in, he knew they were coming, so he consulted his men. Umar and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum, they both said, "We will stand and fight. We're going to drive these guys away." Then Miqdad, who was one of the horsemen of the army, he said, "We will not abandon Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the children of Israel abandoned Musa alayhi salam." So he decided to fight too. Most of the Prophet ﷺ's army, which was only 300 people strong, consisted of the Medinan Ansari people. So he consulted the leader of the Ansar, Sa'ad radiallahu anhu, and he said, "We will follow you, O Prophet of Allah, into the depths of the ocean." So there we have it. The Muslims are going to stand and fight. Here come the Meccans. They have 1,000 men on their side compared to the 313 Muslims. In addition, the Meccans also have 70 horses and 170 camels compared to the Muslims who only have 2 horses and 70 camels. This is an issue. However, One thing you'll learn about Prophet ﷺ is not only was he a brilliant statesman, a brilliant preacher, he was also a brilliant military commander. Clearly guided by Allah, he decided to make the most of the small advantages that he had. One thing that he had was that his army was much smaller than the Meccan army. And what are smaller armies good at?
Fighting?
No? What are small armies good at? Come on.
Maneuvering?
Exactly. They're maneuverable, they're fast, they can move quickly and adapt on the fly. So he decided to go ahead and destroy all the wells in the area and keep one well for themselves and camp there. So that when the Meccan army arrived, they'd be dehydrated, demotivated, and they wouldn't have any supplies basically. He decided to station the Muslim camp on top of a hill near a date palm. By the way, it was Ramadan, so they were fasting or doing all this as well. And so, the day before the battle, Muhammad ﷺ prayed the entire night, and that night Allah sent down rain, and the rain will come into play later on, don't worry. So the day is finally here. The Meccans have descended upon the valley of Badr, which was the valley that the Prophet ﷺ decided to pick to stage this battle. And there's a very good reason for that. On two sides, Badr is surrounded by tall mountains, an arid desert in the middle, and the Muslims are encamped on a now slippery hill. This means that the numbers advantage is able to be negated because the width of the valley is not big enough for the Meccan army to overwhelm the Muslims. So it's a very good stroke of genius on the Prophet ﷺ's part. Now, on the day of the battle, does anybody know how Arab battles would commence?
Yeah, there's a duel between the two
Exactly.
factions.
Exactly. So the armies would send forth their best knights to duel before everyone. So the Meccan champion said, "I will drink from the well of the Muslims or I will die for it." And the Muslims sent forth Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, who is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ and one of the bravest men in all of Islam's history. He stepped forth and slew the enemy despite having weaker armor. He chopped down his leg, finished him off right there. The Meccans were angry, so they sent 3 more of their champions. And interestingly, the Ansaris stepped up to face them, even though this was not even their fight. This was outside of the pledges that they made to the Prophet ﷺ. So they were just doing it out of love and to attain the rewards of Jannah. However, the Meccans refused them and said, "Our fight is not with you. We want to fight the so-called Prophet of God." So he sends forth 2 of the Muslims from Mecca, one of them being Ubaidah radiallahu anhu, and also the man with the Zulfikar sword. Who is that? Ali radiallahu anhu steps forward. This is like his origin story. So the 3 Muslims duel the 3 Meccans. Ali and Hamza managed to strike down their opponents, but unfortunately Shayba, who's the Meccan, he wounds Ubaidah, and Hamza managed to kill Shayba. So Ubaidah is dragged back into the Muslim line, and he later succumbs to his wounds, becoming the 3rd martyr of Islam. May Allah have mercy on him. At this point, the Meccans are enraged. They've lost their 4 best knights, and the Muslims only have 1 casualty. So they decide, let's commence the fight. A shower of arrows ensues on both sides. However, because the Muslims have the high ground, they have the advantage in this instance. And the Meccans are taking losses. So what they do is they decide to do a full-scale charge, and this for the Muslims is the hardest part of the battle, which is why the Prophet ﷺ rode along the lines, screaming to remind the believers that Allah is with them, the angels are looking after them, and looked after them they did. The melee was brutal. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of killing, lots of blood was spilled on the desert floor. And the Muslims shouted, "Ya Mansur Amit," which means, "Oh, those who God has made victorious, slay." The Meccans were taking heavy losses by this point, and remember how dehydrated they were, demotivated, now that the Muslims somehow are holding on, and they're determined to fighting to the death. The Meccans at this point give up and decide to return home. In the chaos that ensues, 2 Ansari boys manage to locate the enemy commander, Abu Jahl, and he's wounded and killed by Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anhu. So now the enemy commander is done, the leader of Quraysh is slaughtered, and the Meccans run home. The Muslims achieved a major victory on this day, and had we lost this one, the Ummah would cease to exist. So I would say it's the most important battle in our entire history. The legacy of this battle lives on, as the heavily outnumbered Muslims managed to defeat the superior Qurayshi army. and it cemented the Prophet ﷺ as a powerful figure in the Arabian Peninsula, and it showed everybody there that the Muslims were not to be trifled with. We went from being persecuted to being winners on the battlefield, to being strong and dependable, and that is what rallied so many behind the cause of Islam and helped unite the Arabian Peninsula against the polytheists of Arabia. So after that, I'd like to talk about why study Islamic history, why it's important. For some people, simply studying Quran and Hadith, it might not be enough to really interest you in Islam. When you take a look at Islamic history and you see the heroes and the sacrifices and the struggles that they went through to make sure that our beautiful religion could survive and thrive until this day, it really helps you come onto your deen more, get close to Allah, and start wanting to study the Quran and Sunnah and what made these great men and women very pious. So there's so many different figures you can call on to have a look at what they did and their conduct. One figure I like to talk about is Salah ad-Din ibn Ayyub, who was a Kurdish commander who fought during the Crusades. He managed to liberate Jerusalem, and when he did so, he spared the lives of all the Christian civilians living in the area. When previously the Christians, when they came to Jerusalem, they massacred the entire Muslim and Jewish population and other Christians. So this is an act of chivalry, and that's why he's revered even in the Western world, Salah ad-Din. May Allah be pleased with him. Are there any other figures or stories that you guys have ever heard and want to relay as something that brought you close to your deen?
I wouldn't relay, but a figure that I know, Muhammad al-Fatih, who conquered Constantinople, now known as Istanbul.
Exactly. He was a Ottoman Sultan, and in 1453, as my brother said, he he conquered the impregnable city of Constantinople, therefore fulfilling the hadith of conquest that Rasulullah said previously, that the Muslims would one day conquer it. And what an army it was, right? These things reinvigorate our iman, because the past 200 years we've been hard done by the world. We've been colonized, we've had our riches taken away from us, we've had our dignity stolen, we've been branded as terrorists and everything. We've lost our clout, if you would. But it's very important to remember our illustrious history and our contributions to the world, not only in warfare, but also in science, medicine, philosophy, and all the rest of it. So I urge you, brothers, please take some time in the month of Ramadan to discover our illustrious history as Muslims and what we've contributed to the world. And remember all the fallen martyrs and that have propelled our faith and made us Muslim today. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.